In Ecce Homo, the strange autobiography Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in the last sane weeks before his final collapse, he sat down to explain the single idea he considered the summit of his entire philosophy. He didn't call it the overman, and he didn't call it the death of God. He wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be other than it is, not in the future, not in the past, not in all eternity. Not merely to bear what is necessary, still less to conceal it. All idealism is mendacity in the face of what is necessary, but to love it." Read that formula slowly, because it makes a specific, almost impossible demand. Not to endure your life, not to make peace with it. To love it, exactly as it happened, with nothing edited out. And this from a man whose actual life, by any honest account, gave him almost nothing easy to love. Today we're going to walk through what Nietzsche actually meant by Amor Fati, the precise three-part formula he built it from, why it is not the passive resignation people mistake it for, and what it would really take to apply it to a single fact of your own life. It's worth remembering exactly what that life looked like, because the formula is worthless as an abstraction, and only means anything against the specific facts it was built to answer. By the time Nietzsche wrote those words, he had already resigned his university chair in Basel due to migraines that could confine him to a darkened room for days at a stretch. His eyesight was so damaged, he sometimes dictated because he couldn't look at a page, and his stomach rejected most food he tried to eat. He had proposed marriage and been refused. He had lost his closest friendship, with Richard Wagner, over a rupture neither man ever fully repaired. He had no permanent home, no steady income beyond a small pension, and a shelf of books that sold so poorly he sometimes paid the printing costs himself. If any philosopher in history had grounds to simply endure his life rather than love it, it was him. He wrote the opposite instruction anyway, and he wrote it about that exact life, not a better one he wished he'd had instead. 1. Where the phrase actually comes from. Amor Fati first appears not in a formal argument, but in a private New Year's resolution, tucked into The Gay Science, the same book that contains both the death of God and the eternal recurrence. Nietzsche wrote, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth." Notice the verb he reaches for first. Not accept, not tolerate, see as beautiful. He is not proposing a coping mechanism for hardship. He is proposing an aesthetic discipline, the same kind of active, deliberate attention a painter brings to an ugly model, finding the composition that makes the whole canvas work. And notice the date this was written, the same winter, in the same notebooks, where the demon of eternal recurrence and the madman's lantern were also taking shape. Amor Fati was never a separate idea bolted onto the rest of Nietzsche's late philosophy. It was the emotional center all of it was built around, written down first as a private vow to himself before it ever became a public argument.
2. The three-part formula and why most people only manage the first part. Go back to the Ecce Homo passage and look at its actual structure, because Nietzsche is doing something more precise than just saying, "love your fate." He names three distinct responses to necessity, in ascending order, and he explicitly rules out the first two. The first is merely bearing what is necessary, gritting your teeth through it, surviving it, waiting for it to end. This is the one response almost everyone actually manages, and it looks like strength from the outside, which is exactly why Nietzsche refuses to count it as the real thing. The second is concealing what is necessary. Here Nietzsche gets unusually harsh. All idealism is mendacity in the face of what is necessary. Concealing means building a comforting story on top of the hard fact instead of looking at it directly. Telling yourself the illness was secretly a blessing, that everything happens for a reason, that the pain was really a hidden gift the whole time. Nietzsche calls this lying, not coping. Only the third response, love, actually looks at the necessary thing without flinching and wants it exactly as it is. Picture someone who has just lost a job they built their identity around.
Bearing it looks like showing up numb every day until a new position appears. Concealing it looks like insisting out loud that they're actually relieved, that it's a blessing in disguise, before they've done any of the work of finding out if that's even true. Loving it, in Nietzsche's specific sense, means something harder than either. Sitting with the raw fact of the loss, refusing both the numbness and the comforting story, until something real can be built that actually incorporates what happened instead of papering over it. The same three-tier structure shows up in far smaller, more ordinary places too, which is exactly why Nietzsche's harshness about concealment matters. Picture someone recovering from a bad breakup who tells every friend, within the first week, that they're actually doing great and so much happier already, before enough time has passed for that to be anything but a story told to end the conversation. That isn't strength. By Nietzsche's own definition, it's the second failure, the more dangerous one, because it looks from the outside exactly like the third response, while doing none of its actual work. The friend who instead says plainly that it hurts, and keeps looking directly at why, is closer to Amor Fati, while sounding, on the surface, far less resolved. 3. Not fatalism, the misreading that guts the whole idea. Here is where Amor Fati gets flattened into something Nietzsche never meant, and it's worth being precise about the difference. Fatalism says the future is fixed, so there's no point doing anything but wait for it. Amor Fati says nothing of the kind. It is a stance toward what has already happened, and toward what is currently, materially necessary. The body you have, the past that already occurred, the conditions you did not choose. Not a license to stop acting on the future you haven't reached yet. Nietzsche himself is the proof this isn't passivity. A genuine fatalist, resigned to bad health, does not spend 2 decades experimenting with climates, diets, and treatments across Switzerland and Italy, chasing marginal relief. A genuine fatalist, resigned to obscurity, does not keep writing book after book into total public indifference, paying to print them himself when no publisher would. Nietzsche loved his fate and fought it in the same motion, and the two were never in contradiction, because Amor Fati was never a demand to stop struggling. It was a demand to stop lying about what the struggle was actually against, and to stop wasting energy wishing the starting conditions had been different, instead of building something out of the ones that were real. Picture 2 people who each receive the same difficult medical diagnosis. One spends their remaining energy resenting the diagnosis itself, replaying the unfairness of it, refusing treatment out of a kind of bitter protest against reality. The other accepts the diagnosis completely, wants no part of it wished away, and for exactly that reason has all their remaining energy free to fight it as hard as medically possible. The second person is closer to Amor Fati than the first, not further from it. Loving your fate and resisting it were never opposites for Nietzsche. Only lying about it and fighting it were. 4. Beauty as a practice, not a feeling you're waiting to arrive. The line, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things," is doing real work with that word, learn. Nietzsche is not describing a feeling that either shows up or doesn't. He is describing a discipline, practiced deliberately, that gets better with repetition the way any skill does. Think about how a working artist actually treats an unpromising subject: a cracked wall, a plain, unglamorous room, an ordinary, tired face. The amateur waits for beautiful subjects to present themselves. The working artist finds the specific angle, the specific light, the specific detail that makes this exact unglamorous thing worth painting, and does it as a practiced technique, not a mystical event. Nietzsche is proposing the same discipline applied to a whole life. The migraines that ended his academic career were not secretly good, but applied as a practiced technique rather than wished away. They are also the specific, real reason he was expelled from a career that would have consumed the time he needed to write Also sprach Zarathustra, The Gay Science, and everything after. He is not claiming the migraines were a blessing. He is doing the harder, more specific work of finding exactly how that real cost became structurally inseparable from the real work. It's the same way a painter doesn't call a cracked wall beautiful in the abstract, but finds the one way the actual crack makes the actual painting better than a smooth wall would have. This is also why learn is the right verb, and not some softer synonym. A beginner painter genuinely cannot see the cracked wall as anything but a flaw to hide. Only practice teaches the eye to find the composition inside the damage instead of around it. Nietzsche is telling himself, in that private New Year's note, that he is still a beginner at this specific skill and intends to keep training it. Not that he has already mastered some permanent, finished state of loving everything that happens to him. The discipline is the point, not the arrival. 5. Applying the practice to his own life, fact by fact. Nietzsche gives us the worked examples, and they are worth walking through individually because the general principle is easy to nod along to and hard to actually do. The broken friendship with Wagner, which by his own private letters devastated him for years, is one example. In his later writing, it becomes the exact rupture that forced him out from under the shadow of the one artistic figure large enough to have absorbed his entire career if he'd stayed close to him. The loss that made an independent Nietzsche possible at all. The failed marriage proposals, which by any ordinary account read as simple loneliness, are another. In the discipline he sets for himself, they become the specific condition of total solitude, he says elsewhere, was necessary for the kind of thinking he was actually doing. Thinking he explicitly says could not have survived a shared domestic life with its daily compromises and distractions. The academic rejection, the empty lecture halls, the professorship resigned in his mid-30s, all of it becomes, worked through rather than wished away, the exact removal of institutional guardrails that let him write sentences no tenured professor of his era could have safely published. None of these were good in themselves. Nietzsche never once claims they were. What he claims is harder and more specific, that each one, examined honestly, rather than either endured numbly or dressed up in comforting language, turns out to be structurally load-bearing in the actual life and actual work that followed. Not a detour from who he became, but a piece of its foundation. 6. How this connects to the demon's question. If you've followed Nietzsche's other central idea, the thought experiment of eternal recurrence, the demon who asks whether you would live this exact life again, unedited, forever. Amor Fati and that question are two faces of the same demand, not two separate ideas. The demon's question is the test. Amor Fati is the practice discipline that lets you pass it. You cannot simply decide, on the spot, when a demon springs the question on you, that you joyfully live your worst year again forever. That kind of yes has to already be built, fact by fact, through the slower work described above. Bearing replaced by loving, concealment replaced by honest sight, wished-for alternate pasts replaced by the specific, worked-through case for why this one, exactly as it happened, is the one you'd choose again. The recurrence question reveals whether the work has been done. Amor Fati is the name for actually doing it. 7. What the practice actually requires of you. Nietzsche never claims this gets finished. He describes Amor Fati as something he wants more and more, a direction of travel rather than an achievement with a completion date. But the practice itself has a shape you can actually start today, on something much smaller than an entire life. Take one specific fact you did not choose and cannot undo. A diagnosis, a failure, a relationship that ended, a body that doesn't do what you wanted it to. Notice first whether you're only bearing it, gritted teeth and waiting for relief. Notice next whether you've quietly started concealing it instead, building a comforting story on top of the fact rather than looking straight at it. Then do the harder, third thing. Find the specific, honest, non-sentimental way that fact is already structurally woven into whatever you have actually built since, the way Nietzsche found his migraines woven into his freedom to write. Not a silver lining invented to make the pain smaller. A real architectural fact about what your actual life is now made of, seen clearly enough to want, without any part of it edited out. So the formula Nietzsche called the summit of his whole philosophy was never a comfortable idea, and it was never permission to stop fighting for a better future. It was a demand to stop lying about the past and the present, and to stop merely surviving the parts of your life you didn't choose. It was a demand to start doing the slow, specific, repeatable work of wanting them exactly as they were, because only that work makes anything you build afterward stand on solid ground instead of a story you're still quietly hoping nobody examines too closely. Nietzsche wrote his own formula down as a New Year's resolution to himself, in a body that was failing him, in a life that had already taken more from him than most people are ever asked to survive. He did not write it because the loving came easily. He wrote it because it didn't, and he wanted it anyway, more and more, for the rest of the time he had. If this gave you a way to look at the one fact of your own life you've only ever been enduring, subscribe to Above Average, where we explore the psychology and philosophy of the thinkers who saw what most people never do. Thanks for watching.